Hey, welcome to the Dr. G Show. I'm Dr. Garrett. So, this is, I think, episode 184 or something like that. But basically, it's the second part to our COVID series. So, last week, if you guys remember, we talked about. I'm going to change this up here. Okay. So last week we talked about masks, and we talked about how coronavirus came from Hunan and Wunan provinces of China, and how we've kind of known about it since 2007, how it was published in research articles like Journal Nature, how its sequencing was published for the world, and then housed in the Wuhan viral laboratory there. So that was all kind of interesting stuff. We talked about that stuff a little bit before. This last week on the Dr. G Show, we kind of really went into the research for trying to figure out whether masks were working or not. And of course, we found out that the mesh for like a mask is not small enough to stop a virus. So there's a whole big problem with this when it comes to basically saying this is the world's most dangerous virus and then allowing people to wear whatever they want. So we talked about, I think, the state of Kansas and what the executive order for it was, but that's true among many other states. So there creates this kind of like chaos, if you will, where they say this is the world's deadliest virus, we're all going to die, and then the results around the world show that it's 99.6% survivable, 6.4%, and that basically it's, and correct me if I'm not exact on these, but statistically, if you're over 70, it's 7%, or you only have a 93% survival rate. If you're over 80, which the life expectancy is 78 in the U.S., so if you're over 80, you have an 86% chance of survival rate. So it doesn't quite marry up, right? And we know that we've had COVID viruses before, and we didn't go to these extremes. We've had flu every year with lots of virulent strains. We didn't go to this extreme before. So it ends up being a lot of more political dogma than anything else. And honestly, what you see is the minute that someone doesn't do what you like, we kind of saw that we separated Americans into two categories. You were either a hero saving lives, or you were killing everybody for freedom, right? So that doesn't match well or mesh well with me, because I'm very like, show me the numbers. Like, I just want statistical information, and I want to base policy, I want to base my own kind of procedures based on what evidence shows. So there's been a huge problem with this, because as you guys have found, there's so much discrepancy. And so that's why you see all the different states doing different things, the different counties doing different things, different countries doing different things, and then having very mixed results. So you had countries that did nothing and just got herd immunity, like Sweden, and I think maybe Finland, and a few other places, and did fine. You saw some countries where they did really heavy on masks and still had worse outcomes. So we're trying to kind of piece together and say, what's the kind of rational perspective to have with this? So on this one, since we've talked about the efficacy of masks and how they're not very efficient, even an N95 for coronavirus, and then you're more likely to set up a population for secondary bacterial infections because of that, because they're constantly rebreathing that in. We saw that the CDC has long-standing guidelines that just suddenly switched in the middle of the political divide. We saw that the World Health Organization had standards that we've gone through for every pandemic, and suddenly all that switched too. So it went to just kind of this really hyperbolic place. So now we have the vaccine. And as soon as the vaccine came out, there became the new strains of COVID. So then it was like, well, wait, is the new vaccine the savior, or are we all going to die from the new variations of those strains? So that's what I want to kind of focus on today. So if you guys have questions about this, let me know. If you have questions about policies before, I'll try to actually, I'm pretty sure I have a digital copy of this, but I'll post this. This is all the data points from like research has shown from masks and their efficacy, what the CDC and the World Health Organization, their policy changes, and that should really help you. Also, I might touch on this too. I made this for a friend. Oh, and we talked about the false positives and how the CDC reported back in May 26, 2020, that the antibody for COVID tests were wrong half the time, false positive over half the time. And really the number was from the CDC 35 to the manufacturers 80%, depending on magnification. Now, we also said that the antibodies do not even test for COVID specifically, but for all coronaviruses and flu virus, all four, and several other cold viruses. So, in a time where you're most likely to get the cold or the flu, people are testing positive and they're calling it COVID. But that by itself, of the ones that are positive, how much of that is actually accurate for COVID? That's the real concern here. So, NPR on April 15, 2020, antibody tests for coronavirus has missed the mark. Says there's no FDA standards for the COVID test. And that's because they just rapidly came out with this, and it was based on these certain magnifications. And if you went high enough, you could actually make them all positive for every test for these PCRs. So there was no standard, so different tests could get different results, but they're all testing positive for flu also. So, and then scientist Dr. H. Gilbert says antibody test is much more likely to be wrong in a population with very little COVID exposure. FDA says, here's what would happen if we use the test with 90% specificity in a population that only has 1% of the people having coronavirus. Nobody knows for sure, but that could be the situation in many parts of the country. So in that instance, more than 90% of the positive tests would be false positive and falsely reassuring. So that's straight from the FDA. And that's where, it gets very frustrating because, you'll have people say, arguing, well, the FDA says this. But they totally proof text that and negate the fact that the FDA also says all these other things, right? We know that the U.S. Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, in March 2020, tweeted, so this is the U.S. Attorney General, or Surgeon General, said, seriously, people, stop buying masks. They're not effective in preventing general population from catching coronavirus, which they're not, right? So in the beginning, again, our own U.S. Surgeon General was saying, don't do this. Now, did he flip? Oh, yeah, just like everybody else. And then the World Health Organization raised concerns about the potential problem that arises from wearing a mask. False sense of security would undermine other preventative measures. Self-contamination from touching the mask, a contaminated mask. So you are breathing out 100% humidity, which then creates a lovely petri dish in your mask. Then you're inhaling that back into you, putting you at risk of secondary bacterial infections. And then epidemiologist Sergio Brusin of the European Center for Disease Control, so our CDC for Europe, he's in charge of that, and he said masks are not effective in protecting the wearer. So CNN report that the World Health Organization, March 31st, 2020, quote, WHO stands by the recommendations to not wear masks if you are not sick or caring for someone who is sick, end quote. There is no specific evidence to suggest that wearing a mask by the mass population has any benefit. And then Dr. Mike Ryan, Executive Director of the World Health Organization Health and Emergency Program, is the one that said that. So, do you guys see where we're at here? We have this wonderful duplicity of information to create just chaos and confusion, and everybody feels like they're right. But again, with me, my job is just to say, here's the information. Don't proof text it, right? So you guys have heard one side, you've heard the other side. Now you make the most effective decision for yourself based on that information. And then lo and hold. Do you guys have any? If you guys have questions, post those for sure. I know I've gotten a few messages over the last week that people are really concerned about this. So lo and behold, now we come out with the vaccine, and the vaccine is going to save everybody. I think more appropriately, the election was going to save everybody because now it's not political. Yeah, Heather Hicks says it's so confusing. And it really is. It really is. And that's why we always stand on the standards by which we have addressed all pandemics in the past. Not the sudden switch, but how we have addressed all of these. Alright, so what about the vaccine? You guys have heard about the vaccine coming out. There's 3 different ones so far that are ready to go. The Pfizer one, the Moderna one. Now, both of those are 95% effective. Now, what the hell does that mean? It doesn't mean what you think it means. So, the Pfizer study. So and the Johnson & Johnson one's coming out. It's 86% effective, or 66 to 85%. I think the average was 75%, but it depended. Because I think they used, for the Johnson & Johnson, South Africa as their testing subjects instead of Americans. So that was kind of weird. And so if you guys don't know, we'll talk more about this, but viruses change and evolve as they get spread from person to person. So different countries' versions of our viruses may not be exactly the same, and the vaccine may not be effective towards that at all. So that's one of the things that we've kind of talked about in the very beginning of this, is what is it, how much is it really going to be protective? Because we know that flu virus, right? We've had flu virus for hundreds of years. We know that we had a vaccine, I think, for 100 years now. And it's about 0 to 5% effective. And that's because the vaccine is static. But the virus keeps changing. So it's the idea of like having a wanted poster of me from 1982 and then like, why is this not effective, right? Because I don't look the same as I did in 1985. Got a little bit more gray here, a little bit more pudge here, a little bit more fur here, but I don't look the same as 1985. So the idea when it comes to antibiotics and vaccines is we know that within 3 to 5 years that we will have national resistance to that. Within 11 years, we can expect global resistance to that antibiotic and that vaccine. So we might have a general consensus for a few variations, but there's so many that the potential is it's going to be very ineffective, right? Maybe in the very beginning, but after you evolved a little bit, not so much. Okay, so Heather says, we have a mask mandate here and people just have gone crazy. The anti-maskers are so rude, angry, and hateful. Yeah, and that's probably been the frustrating part about all this is you have people that are pro-maskers, and if you are not wearing a mask, they are the Karens, right? So all the Karens are the opposite. And that because there's no fruit here, right? So if I don't wear a mask inside Dylan's and somebody comes up and yelling at me, I'm Karen, right? Oh, how dare me not wear a mask. But if I'm wearing a mask in a place where people aren't wearing masks, then look at me, I'm Karen, all being in people's faces about wearing masks. Well, and let me kind of back that up. The Karen is the person arguing with everybody about what they're doing, getting all up in their business, right? So, I mean, frankly, if you think a mask protects you, then wear a mask. If you don't think it protects you, then don't wear a mask. So, you know, there's certain population that's probably more likely to benefit from that. But even in surgery, the masks are not to protect the patients. The masks are to protect the doctor from blood droplets, not from viruses. They go right through that mask. So I can wear a mask and it goes all the way through. And so, like in the beginning, you know, wear a bandana, wear this, wear that. So it's all about slowing that, but not stopping. And then, of course, nobody's wearing them properly, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's one of those things of like everybody's getting all hyper. Like someone will get hyper about, oh, don't drink this, it's poison. But you're drinking purified water out of plastic. So, probably shouldn't be on a high horse about that quite yet. So that's where we got to kind of step back. And that's the hard part, is because everybody wants the other side to be wrong, instead of saying the truth is most likely lies in the middle. It really does. So be kind to other people, because, hey, you don't have to wear a mask if you have speech problems, if you're deaf, if you have been raped and had PTSD with somebody like putting something around your mouth, you know, if you have asthma, allergies, you don't have to wear a mask. And then people are attacking those people for that. Like they have legitimate, actual medical reasons for that. Now, I'll tell you what, if this was Ebola, we would be treating this very differently, right? But the fact that we're like, oh, kids, maybe, you know, at the airport, don't sit next to each other while you're waiting for the airplane, because that's dangerous. But when you get on the plane, everybody can sit together, because now that's not dangerous, and you can take it off while you eat. So, you know, that's where people like me, who are critical thinkers, and try not to be part of the whole Dunning-Kruger effect, that's where all this becomes a bit of a farce. But for other people, they don't see that, and then they really jump on people for this. So, what does 95% protective means? So on the radio, you'll hear, and the news talks about Moderna and Pfizer are 95% protective at preventing the most severe components or severe outcomes of coronavirus. So that makes people feel like if I take it, I won't get severe issues, right? But research-wise, if you did nothing, statistically 99.64% of the American population should not have severe reactions. 99.96%. So if you take the vaccine, there's a 95% chance you won't have severe reactions. But let's break this down. So Pfizer's study was 43,661 volunteers. Now, that sounds like a huge study, right? Like, I was kind of impressed when I first heard that. I was like, wow, 46,000 people. That's pretty good. But that's not who they tested the vaccine on. They waited for those volunteers to start having symptoms of cold, flu, corona COVID-2, we don't know. And then 170 ended up having symptoms. So the number they quote for the research is 43,661, but of those that were symptomatic, it was 170. You guys hear that? 170 people is what they base this off of. Out of that 170, this is messed up, 162 received placebo. 162 out of the 170 received placebo, which is just salt water or sugar water, right? 8. You hear me? 8. Eight people out of 43,000 received the vaccine. 8. 8 people. And of that 8 people, hallelujah, 95% didn't have severe symptoms. Hey. So that's pretty good. 8 motherfucking people. 8. The perception is the vaccine was tested on 43,000 people. Usually you take 43,000, divide them in half. Half would get placebo, half would get the actual pharmaceutical. And at least then it's okay, it was 21.5. That's fairly a good study. But we are vaccinating an entire population from 8. I'm not saying it's bad, or that it doesn't work, or whatever. But think about the risk here. 4. So it said 1%. Where is that number? Oh my God. Serious side effects were 1%. Shoulder injury, lymphadenopathy, and Bell's palsy. Out of 8 people who got the vaccine, how does that even work? 1%? They must have mathed this out a little bit. But that means somebody has permanent Bell's palsy, or most likely, maybe temporary Bell's palsy, but their face is drooping like this. I don't know. So, shoulder injury, that's worth herd immunity, or worth it probably. Lymphadenopathy, that means like swollen lymph nodes. That's probably worth it. Not Bell's palsy. Most people ended up with soreness, fever, chills, headaches, fever, swelling. Like that. That's kind of what I've heard from my patients that have had that test or that vaccination, and that makes sense. I mean, the fact that it's negative 80 degrees might do that by itself. So, 8 people. And if you get the vaccine, you can still get COVID. You can still spread COVID. It doesn't change anything. The whole point was to decrease your risk of complications, of severe complications, which is 86% of people who are, have comorbidities already and are over 70 years old. Not the 99.64% that aren't going to have that. So, what about the mRNA? So, mRNA. So I don't know. That's so messed up. All right. So, what about the mRNA? You guys have any questions about that? I see Heather wrote some stuff. Thanks for explaining it. Some of that's BS. Is she saying I'm BS? I don't need chronic medical issues. Yeah. Now, so far, we don't. I mean, depending on the Bell's palsy and the shoulder injury, hopefully these are kind of short term. Now, the mRNA, so your DNA is like 20 to 25,000 genes long, right? Most of your DNA makes everything other living things, so only a part of it's actually turned on for you. So your DNA makes dogs and chickens and cats and fish. And that's why embryologically, if you ever take the course embryology, it's the worst. Because a fish, a monkey, a lizard, a human, all look exactly the same during utero. And then eventually, if they have the certain chromosomes turn on, or genes turn on, and it says, oh, this is a fish, it becomes a fish, it becomes a monkey, it becomes a snake or salamander or whatever, right? It's crazy, right? But out of those 20 to 25,000 genes, most people, let's say, genes, all those genes, very specific genes, will encode for very specific proteins. Those proteins typically upregulate or downregulate processes. So, in this case, mRNA is a messenger RNA. Now you have DNA, which is 2 RNAs together that match up, like a zipper. and then RNA is like half of a zipper, right? So it's kind of like the template for the other side. mRNAs, they don't actually go, like these aren't going into your nucleus of your cell where your DNA is stored. So that kind of like fear of like, whoa, they're gonna like genetically change us, probably not, right? Now, the labs are saying that this doesn't penetrate the nucleus, but it shouldn't, right? In theory. And then mRNA, basically, it messages the cell to produce something. So in this case, we want it to message the cell to then make adhesion molecules that are going to stimulate your immune response to COVID, right? So it's kind of like maybe I go to the next town and warn them about BTK so they can be on the lookout for him, right? And then the cops will be more likely to catch him. So that's kind of what mRNA is. And so this mRNA has instructions to make viral proteins that trigger the cell response. So for this, it's the viral spike glycoprotein of SARS-CoV-2. That's all it is. Again, just like a wanted poster. And then that's going to trigger T cells and B cells. T cells are like neighborhood watch. They go around your body. Do you belong here? Do you not belong here? So it'll see those and go, oh my God, you guys aren't supposed to be here. I'm going to go tell. So it tells B cells. B cells make specific antibodies. So they're like cops. They fire off the antibodies at the rate of 3,000 per second per cell, specifically coded to that protein sequence or an antigen, right? So the mRNA is going in there, creating a little sequence for you on your cell, and then making your immune system respond to that. And then that creates antibodies. And then that triggers histamine reactions, why you get the inflammatory response or the feeling like you're sick, which you should if you get that kind of vaccine. And then eventually you make memory cells. T memory cells, B memory cells. That's the whole point of every immunization, whether good, bad, or indifferent, is to create memories. So now Neighborhood Watch has a wanted poster of measles, of chickenpox, of HIV, of COVID. And then, same thing with the cops, right? B cells, they have their little wanted poster. So then your body should respond faster and faster, and then you shouldn't get really sick as long, right? There's no amping up process. So with that, it doesn't end up in their DNA, and you can't get COVID from the vaccine. Now, some vaccinations are live vaccines, like polio, the live one, right? They shoot it up your nose and it's live, and you can get polio from that. The other kind is attenuated. So it's kind of like taking me, or let's say some bad guy, breaking his legs and arms. So, all right, he's a bad guy, but he can't really do anything to us. So attenuated, you still will have the immune response. You can still get sick from every other flu and cold virus there is. All 200 different cold and flu viruses. You can get other COVID viruses, right? So, but this one doesn't have any actual COVID virus in it. So you cannot get COVID from this, but you're going to get COVID eventually. Just so you guys know, 100% of the American population will get COVID. A small amount of them will get overwhelmed and they'll get sick. And then a tiny fraction of those will get so sick they get tested and then they get test positive. And then a tiny fraction of them, which is 0.36%, will suffer severe consequences and could die. That's the same as it's always been. But it is not, are you going to get exposed to COVID? It is, when are you going to get exposed to COVID? That's it. That's all it is. So, you know, a few episodes ago, we talked about the nutrition and research that was well published that for preventing COVID and treating COVID in other countries, which we don't do here at all. We might do another one and talk about that if you guys want. We talked about it a year ago, but probably need a refresher at this point. Now, some people have the question, is it tested on fetal cells? Are there like human aborted fetal cells? Now, you guys probably don't know. You can download the FDA Pink Book, and you can look at every ingredient in a vaccine, all of the vaccines. Your most common vaccines have aborted fetal cells. Some people don't care. Some people do. For the some people that do, that's a big issue. So the WI38 cell line, that's an aborted fetal baby. The HEK cells, those are aborted fetal cells. There's one more, MRC5. That's an aborted baby. So there's 3 different aborted babies. There's a few other, like when it says, I don't know, like lung diploid tissue, that's human tissue. That's an aborted fetus. So why not grow viruses for humans in a human? And they already have a dead baby, so let's just use the dead baby. So for some people might have a problem with that, other people don't. They just keep rebreeding those cells over and over and over. Now, when it comes to this, Pfizer says and Moderna that they don't have any aborted fetal cells, but they do test the vaccine on aborted cells to see how they'll react in living tissue. So for people that have a social, religious kind of objection to companies profiting using aborted fetal tissue, that might be an issue. Other people, maybe not. Maybe they like the confidence of like, oh, I'm glad they tested this on a dead person. I don't know. And it's always interesting, like the Catholic Church, the Pope came out and said, well, you know, it's better benefit than risk with using aborted fetal cells. Seems a little odd. And then, I like this. They said there's no clear evidence that the vaccine would harm a fetus. Now, out of the 8 people from the Pfizer study, guess how many were pregnant? None. I don't think there was. None. None. It's never been tested on a fetus, a pregnant person. No, none. Now, theoretically, should it cause harm? Shouldn't. But I love that it's just like no clear evidence. You don't have any evidence. So, same thing with children. What we'll do in children, we don't know because we didn't test children, you know. Now, this vaccine is a little different because mRNA, it actually gets broken up pretty fast. So if you just injected this, it would break up and it wouldn't do anything to us. So they actually have to put this in a capsule, like a little ball, right? So some viruses have envelopes, and that keeps them safe through passage. So this vaccine has a coating. That's why you see it written a little bit different than other vaccines when it comes to ingredients. It's just like, here's the lipid part, here's the salt part. You know, I've never seen anything written like that before. But that's why, because part of it's the vaccine, and then this is our kind of biomedical engineering component to where we create an envelope and put it in there and then inject it in people. And toxicity-wise, I gotta say, I wrote a few letters for patients about them objecting to this and kind of advocating for them, but honestly, this is probably the safest vaccine I've ever seen. There's no mercury, there's no formaldehyde, there's no formalin, there's probably very little risk for pesticides, herbicides in there, there's no human fetal tissue in there. So what's actually in there, both of those, and I'm sure the Johnson & Johnson is very similar, but both of those, they have acetic acid, which is kind of vinegar, they have sugar in there, and they have salt water. That doesn't sound too bad. And the only real harmful thing that you can really see in there, there's a few that are kind of questionable. They're really, really long ones, but they're not quite triggering ones, if you will. But propylethylene glycol's in there, polyethylene glycol, or PEG, that's antifreeze. Now, sorbitol's in the other one, but sorbitol is created from antifreeze. So both of them have antifreeze in there, which begs the question to why they have to store it at negative 80 degrees. But actually, the reason they have to do that is because at room temperature, that envelope degrades, and then the mRNA degrades, and then the vaccine doesn't do anything. If they sell you a warm vaccine for this, it's not effective at all at that point. So that became the big problem with delivery, was how you deliver a vaccine that has to be at negative 80 degrees. So a little bit of antifreeze that's in there, which A, is toxic, but most of you guys are eating and drinking that on a regular basis anyways. So the tiny little fraction in there, I have to say, push come to shove, this is not the worst vaccine that I've seen. This is probably the best vaccine. Someday, hopefully, we'll come out with green vaccines that don't need preservatives, but otherwise, they typically have horrific inflammatory neurotoxic chemicals in there. And that's where you see, like, some, Gardasil girls get their vaccine, and then on the way home or in the waiting room, they die. They just die, right? That's how toxic some of those vaccines are. People just die. And then we talked about the side effects and the serious side effects on that. Now, we come out with this vaccine that's going to save the world, right? And then the minute they come out with it, they said, oh my God, we have these new variations in Brazil, and ours came from England, South Africa, and California, and now what, right? So I was hoping everything calmed down when we got the vaccine. A bunch of people get vaccines, and then it'll all kind of go quiet, and then it'll be fine, and we'll be back to just calling everything flu again and being fine with that. But the new strains, so one thing is, I kind of laughed about this when I listened to it on NPR as they were freaking out on the news, but every virus and every bacteria, its whole job is to cloak and evolve and change. All of it. So they're like, oh my God, there's a new variant. Yeah, that's how viruses work, right? If I go rob a store and I get away, the next time I know they're looking for me. So I'm going to wear a mustache next time. And then the next time I'm going to wear some different glasses. And then I'm going to wear a wig. And then eventually I'm going to look so different that the cops won't even suspect who I am. That then becomes a totally new virulent strain, right? But every time it survives one person to another, it is slowly figuring out how our body is figuring it out and modifying that. Penicillin's a great example. Penicillin is encapsulated like this, right? It's inside there. You can't get it. But all these little junctions on here, they have little bitty bolts. So penicillium from mold from bread, when they created that as a drug, it does not change. It now goes and it finds those bolts and basically dissolves them. The shell falls away, and now our immune system can quickly identify that pathogen and get rid of it. But what the bacteria started doing was adding on extra parts to it. So now the antibiotic would attack all the extra little things that it included, and its internal capsule would survive, and then that drug, or that becomes MRSA, that becomes VRE, that becomes Clostridium difficile, that becomes drug-resistant bacterial infections. Viruses do the exact same thing. They're constantly evolving. The crazy thing is we do the same things. Like, none of this is like out of the ordinary. The way your immune system fights and the way that our bacteria and viruses fight is exactly how we act as humans. So the whole goal is to evade. So when you come out with the South African strain, that has enough variations that now the vaccine, who is an mRNA dedicated to the one that started from England that then went to the US in midsummer, is it different enough? So if the new coronavirus from Brazil looks significantly different from the one that started, then the vaccine will not work at all. Or it might just work a little bit. Like, they don't know, but we know based on the flu and the 100 years of history of vaccine with the flu that this is exactly what's going to happen. It's an absolute normal thing to happen, and it's fine. Now, does the strains become more virulent? Like, do they become more aggressive, more apt in outwitting your defenses? Yeah, sure. The new flus, I think the one from Brazil, it attaches stronger. And so then you're more likely to definitely get that one versus one that doesn't attach as well. And it can maybe be caught up in the mucus, right? So the new, and what's interesting is the variant that attacked the U.S. was the English COVID that switched over to what's called the 8117. And that became your most common one, even though there was other ones. There was already multiple strains here, right? And now they're talking about testing different strains, but we haven't even tested actual COVID yet. We test PCR over magnification that includes colds and flus and all that. And I think we mentioned that before, that, you know, if it's a COVID patient, no matter what they have, that is now a more profitable patient for that hospital and clinic. So, who cares if it's false positives? Who cares that there's a 35 to 80% false positive rate? Who cares of the 50% to 20% that's positive, that's accurate, that it may not even be positive for COVID? Who cares? You're making more money. So nobody's gonna bat an eye at this. And so then that creates that hysteria, and then that creates the separation of heroes and killers, right? I liked in the beginning when they were like, oh, you know, I'm going to work every day, I'm essential. I was like, God dang it, I'm a hero, right? I'm going to work and doing my job. That's all heroes are, people that just do their jobs. So, did this make it more confusing? I don't know. I'm going to upload my notes for you guys, though. So, I don't think they'll take down my show because I didn't say anything bad about this. So, I'll let you guys look through the same data that I looked through. I'll try to put all that up there for you. And then I want you guys to kind of foster your own decisions through this. But the main thing is really just calming the hell down. Okay? Don't worry about the hype. Don't worry about the we're all going to die. Because the same people that say we're all going to die also forget that 99.6% are going to survive. Even 86% of those over 80 are going to survive. So, when you hear about like rare people, like, oh, there's a kid that died. Well, it turns out that he was grossly obese and he also had type 2 diabetes and da-da-da-da. And yeah, he probably is going to die from losing a toe, staph infection, or cold or flu viruses. Just is. So, overdiagnosis apart, for money, that's one thing. You know, false positive, that's another big problem. You know, but what do you do? What are you going to do? Well, a lot of times with the mask, a lot of times with the mask, I just treat it as like the no shirt, no shoes rule, right? If I want to go inside 7-Eleven, great, I got to wear my shoes and a shirt. I'm old enough, I remember I didn't wear shoes and shirts I had cut off jeans where the pockets were hanging down, going into the creek and then, or the creek, and then going to, you know, the convenience store and getting stuff. Nobody cared. And then one day he was like, oh, you have to have shoes and a shirt. Oh my God, the humanity, right? And so now it's like, okay, if Starbucks wants me to wear a mask, I want Starbucks. I'll wear a mask. If I have to go wear a mask, if I had to wear a mask the whole time in, like, you know, George's, oh, I ain't going to George's then. Get it to go. But, you know, but I'm I'm willing to do the shoot and service shirt service thing if I want their product, right? I'm fine with that. Sometimes I don't wear a mask, and I'm fine with that. So I'm fine with everybody doing what they need to do based on accurate information, accurate statistics, accurate research. So if you guys have more questions, feel free to post those. That time went really fast. I thought for a minute like the video wasn't working at all, and I thought, oh my God, the Facebook's shutting me down because they know what I'm talking about. All right. So thank you guys for joining us. Next week, let's probably just do a reiteration of the research for things that work against COVID. Okay. So there's a few things that have been 100% effective from frontline workers in places like China during the last SARS COVID. And then, of course, there's the living document of research that has been used during this whole COVID thing from all these other nations. You know, there are standards of treatment used in other countries that say this herb treats and cures. But Americans, we can't say that. We can't do that. So basically there's all this information out there that nobody's telling Americans because that's not how our FDA works. You can't say those kind of things. You can say a drug, you can say a vaccine is going to cure you when it was tested on 8 people, and you can claim a 95% success rate off that. Nobody bats an eye. But you can't say that an herb that's been 100% effective in 7 different researches published in peer-reviewed journals from frontline medical workers does anything. America! So, we'll talk about that stuff next week. Alright. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Feel free to post more questions. Thank you guys. I hope this helps. It's a confusing time. Bye, y'all. If you end this live, end it. Let's see.